Alrighty, guys. It has been quite a while, more than a month since the last session, but I've finally gotten another session in on my campaign. Some relatively substantial things happened. I do think this will be, this is sort of the end of Act 1, I believe I would consider it. So starting off, we had a new character, a half orc barbarian, the second half orc barbarian, to join our campaign. And we had otherwise Humdu, Adrian, Meng, Nimbus, Starkwaffless, Cletus all joining us for the session. 6 players, nearing the upper limit for the amount of players I could have for any one given session. And but it was good that we had a lot of players because some relatively challenging encounters came up. Downtime, the only substantial thing that occurred, Adrian performed his bard act at the Arcor City Opera House, where he made a fair chunk of change, and afterwards, he was visited by. We continued a little bit of his personal plot, his personal story. He was visited by his father's second-hand man, Manolo, and his father is like a criminal, like kingpin type, a couple of countries or realms away, and he was basically offered an opportunity to fix their relationship, which had up until this point been quite contentious, and he was offered the position to run his father's business in the realm that they're currently in, Igolia. Adrian had turned down this offer, which fair enough. And the only slight concern was with this was that now the main adventure I had prepared for this session was this bandit camp encounter that the this Manolo effectively offered Adrian this skeleton key that could have been used to further his goal in exploring the labyrinth of Lurius, which he was currently locked out of. And he was basically offered this skeleton key in exchange for wiping out these bandits in the area so that his father's business could overtake this area. And so dealing with those bandits, wiping them out, was the main thing that I had prepared. I was going to use the werewolf den, or at least steal some of the major ideas of the werewolf den from Curse of Strahd. So these were going to be bandit highwaymen that also happen to be werewolves. There was going to be a thing where they kidnapped children and forced them to fight, and then took the strongest of those fighters to turn into werewolves and like induct into their organization. And there was going to be like a sort of political element to play off of, where one of the higher ups wanted to end this practice and just continue raising all of the werewolves out of exclusively their own children and keep it all in the bloodline. And the current leader wanted to continue this practice that they had always been doing of kidnapping children and making the strongest into werewolves. And the players would have had the opportunity to sort of like play them off of each other and possibly like team up with one side or something along those lines. But instead, Adrian just stole this key off of Manolo. He disguised himself as a beggar and then pickpocketed him. And they just took that key and went straight to the Labyrinth of Lurius. On the way there, they ran into some dwarves and they were hiding up in some trees from some orcish wargs that were trying to kill them and eat them. And the party did rescue these dwarves, and the dwarves promised to create some items for the party. So the idea that I have in mind for how this is going to work out is that they'll start off by giving the players each a masterwork item, which is effectively a regular weapon but with an additional +1 to hit as like a extra quality. And then the players can come by and whenever they find rare materials or resources or magic items or runes, or if they have like a large amount of money or anything, they can bring these masterwork items back to the dwarves, who will like further enchant them and upgrade them into higher and higher level magic items. At least that's what I have in mind for them. Okay, so they got back into the labyrinth. Yeah. So the labyrinth I had a lot less prepared for. I did prepare it somewhat because I knew that it was gonna be possible for them to just skip straight to this dungeon rather than deal with the bandits. And uh, but instead of there being any sort of political social aspect, which maybe I could have tried to work in there, it was they basically went into this maze filled with minotaurs, and they and I think like in my mind I had sort of envisioned them sort of like running into these minotaurs and then trying to like just run through the maze, and then having these minotaurs use their like labyrinth recall or whatever it was called, to like perfectly track down and hunt down the players. That's not what ended up happening. The players just ganged up and killed every single minotaur they ran across one by one, which I guess makes more sense. And in this maze, they found a cursed item, which Meng picked up and decided not to put on, which good decision making right there by not just immediately grabbing and attuning to every magic item you see, and that ended up paying off. In the fourth level, they the final level of the labyrinth, they ran into Lurius himself. They like absolutely smoked him. Really, I honestly thought that this encounter might have led to like a total party kill, which I was like worried about because they had four whites and then four whites carrying a palanquin that Lurius was riding on top of, and he is a high level necromancer. But they rolled some disastrous natural ones throughout the combat and just were not hitting at all. And the players just crushed them really. Which I guess I'm glad it worked out for the. I did partly want Lurius to come across as more threatening and more of a challenge, and like possibly them getting defeated by him the first time and then having to like come back a second time to fight him for real. Uh, just to make them hate Lurius a little more, make it a little more dramatic. But that's the way the dice go sometimes, and which is fine ultimately because if they did run away, coming back probably would have been much more difficult now that Larius had known that they're coming after him. But they did kill Larius, and so in the encounter, I had a slowly decreasing difficulty check for a perception check that I had Adrian, who has this ankh, that a magical ankh that brings people back to life. Uh, so every turn he would have to make this check to see whether or not he was hearing this telepathic voice. He managed to always fail it, but he did discover after killing Larius that there was the original owner of this tomb, a knight never dying named Onofrius, was like just lying in a sarcophagus. So the what I originally had intended for this encounter was for them to sort of just like get utterly like smoked and trashed and just like have to basically survive until they can revive this like super. It was literally a basically just a good death knight, like a death knight but lawful good instead of, I imagine death knights are lawful evil by default. And but they ended up not needing him at all. They just killed Larius without ever needing to use this Death Knight's assistance. And so afterwards, I this Knight Never Dying just has like a hoard, this vast cache of all the treasures and gold he's ever accrued in his life, all like buried with him in his tomb. And I wasn't sure whether or not like after the combat, uh, Adrian was still going to revive this Knight Never Dying because um um didn't necessarily need to. He could have just taken all of the treasure and left that knight there to continue to be sealed in that sarcophagus. But he did end up using it and rescuing this Knight Never Dying. So they did make an extremely powerful ally, this Death Knight, who basically is indebted to them. And but like they could have conceivably walked away with 100,000 gold pieces if they just stole this guy's treasure and then left him to be sealed forever. And but instead they got a small share. They got 1,000 gold pieces each for that this knight had offered to them, and they also required this artifact, this ancient relic that they had been looking for. Adrian was doing this because he knew it was connected. It was the same artifact that his like fiance was looking for, but he killed Galerius before getting any information from him, so he doesn't exactly know where to go next. But they do have this extremely powerful magic item. Now, the thing about this magic item is that there are multiple people out there in the world who also really want this magic item. So it is going to be just dangerous in general for them to be holding on to it at all. And I think the next session is going to be a really big, like, deciding moment for where the rest of this campaign is going to go. Because this is like an ancient elven relic. So, like, well, two things, or a number of things I think I know are going to happen. The master, the true big bad evil guy, the like mentor and teacher of Glorious Pain, is going to come after the party for killing his apprentice. So they're basically now going to be hunted down by an extremely powerful necromancer, and so they're gonna have a few options. They could conceivably take this relic back to the humans that have claimed it theirs, who they found it some number of decades, maybe centuries ago, and have claimed it their own. And if they bring it to this duke, then he'll like offer his protection to these players. And or the elves who, did originally create the artifact will offer their protection in return for the artifact. And at least that's my hope, is to keep the players in this general region, because if they just run away, or like, I think otherwise their first thought would be to just like, all right, well, screw this place. Like, there's an evil necromancer who lives in this area and wants to kill us. Like, let's just skedaddle halfway across the world. Um, which, that is like a general, uh, not necessarily a problem with D&D, but what makes D&D like a great storytelling device in the first place, I would say, is that all the players, all the characters will always act as like logically and as real characters as possible, because they will always try to make the best possible decision for themselves. They're never going to act out of anything other than their best self interest, and so that can become slightly problematic in that, uh, like if they decide to leave, then all the content that I had prepared for this general area is going to be a little bit harder to implement at that point. And I'm not entirely sure what it would look like if they decide to just leave. That would be an option available to them if they just want to keep the artifact for themselves and just run off to a place. But I definitely think I'll try to drive home the point that if they do that, then they will have nothing in between them and this necromancer. That I guess I will just have to make it explicitly clear that this necromancer will be willing to follow them wherever they go to recover or to avenge his apprentice. And but I do imagine there's still places they could go that would still be safe. But I do think it'll be interesting to leave that up to the players, and if they do decide to just run off away from Igolia and just to some new place, uh, where they even want to go to do that, which I'm not entirely against. I think as long the one thing I really don't want to let happen is for all of them to split up. Because if Humdu says like, well, I'm going to run back to my monastery and go back up north, and then Adrian is like, well, I'm going to go all the way to the west, all the way to Dari City, and Cletus is like, well, I'm going to go all the way east to go hang out with the dwarves, my clan again. That is where a problem will arise. So as long as they all stick together, I can still make anything wherever they want to go work. So yeah, I am really excited to see where this next session goes. I think that's, in a sense, I've kind of considered everything that happened up until this point kind of like a prologue to the actual campaign, which I think any general DMing advice, any DM would tell any aspiring DM that like what is going to occur next session should probably be the first session of a campaign, because the stakes are going to be dramatically raised, and like I think finally for the first time all the players will have been given some sort of purpose, like at least a collective goal that they are all trying to accomplish, which is going to be not get killed by this supremely powerful necromancer. And there will actually be something to like watch out for. There will actually be a danger. And another thing I'll have to do is actually make this necromancer seem dangerous, because Lurius, he summoned some undead monsters that the players all killed. But I do think this master, this true big bad evil guy, he's going to have to do something to really display just how powerful he is, which might involve the players having to like leave from a situation rather than fighting to the last hit point in that situation. And I know a the like forced retreat encounter is it goes horrifically every single time it ever is attempted in any D&D campaign. So I think for one, I think I'll have to try to make this something that the players witness. Like they should be far enough away to never even begin engaging in it in the first place, rather than being in it and then eventually having to make the decision to leave. And I'll just have to like really drill it into this like situation that if you engage in this fight, if you like continue with this, then you are surely going to die. Like you can tell this guy is just dropping cloud kills on a whim. Like you are supremely out leveled by this guy. Uh, and I do know like players hate the no win situation. But I can't think of. Well, I guess that will have to be the main thing I think about and try to figure out before the next session is how to create this menacing villain without just straight up creating a no win situation for the players. And like I guess a little bit I can do of people just talking about him, uh people just saying how scary he is. uh but I feel like that's not as impactful as seeing it with your own eyes. So what I'm trying to say is I think I'm gonna force my players into a no-win situation and then see how horrifically that goes. And who knows? We might have our first party death and or a total party kill. And even though I know it's already my fault, I'm going to blame it on my players anyways. All right, I'll see ya.